The rugged peaks and verdant valleys of the Zagros Mountains harboured one of ancient Mesopotamia's most enigmatic peoples during the early centuries of the 2nd millennium BC. Archaeological excavations across western Iran have gradually unveiled the material culture of the Kassites, revealing settlements perched on defensible ridges and nestled in fertile intermontane basins where these mountain dwellers first established their distinctive way of life. Excavations at sites like Godin Tepe and Tepe Nush Ijan have yielded pottery sherds, bronze implements, and architectural remains that bear the unmistakable hallmarks of early Kassite occupation. The ceramic assemblages from these highland settlements display a characteristic greyware tradition, with vessels featuring burnished surfaces and geometric incised patterns that distinguish them from contemporary Mesopotamian pottery styles. These distinctive ceramics appear in stratified contexts dating to approximately 1800 to 1700 BC, providing crucial chronological anchors for understanding Kassite origins. The settlement patterns revealed through survey work across the central Zagros demonstrate a preference for elevated locations that commanded strategic views of mountain passes and river valleys. At Godin Tepe, archaeologists uncovered rectangular mud brick structures arranged around central courtyards, with thick defensive walls suggesting the inhabitants faced periodic threats from neighbouring groups. Storage facilities containing large ceramic jars indicate these communities maintained surplus agricultural products, pointing to a degree of economic sophistication beyond simple subsistence farming. Bronze metallurgy constituted a cornerstone of early Kassite material culture, with workshops at highland sites producing distinctive weapon types and ornamental objects. The bronze daggers and spearheads recovered from Kassite contexts display unique decorative motifs and manufacturing techniques that set them apart from contemporary Mesopotamian metalwork. These weapons often feature elaborate hilts with geometric patterns and animal motifs that would later appear in Kassite royal iconography during their rule over Babylonia. The Kassite language presents scholars with one of the most perplexing linguistic puzzles of the ancient Near East. Unlike the Semitic languages that dominated Mesopotamian civilization, or the Indo-European tongues spoken by many of their contemporaries, Kassite belongs to neither major language family. The surviving corpus of Kassite words, preserved primarily in Akkadian texts and personal names, reveals a language with distinctive phonological features and grammatical structures that resist easy classification. Analysis of Kassite personal names provides the richest source of linguistic data, with hundreds of examples preserved in cuneiform archives from Babylonia. These names frequently contain theophoric elements referring to Kassite deities like Shukamuna and Shumalia, combined with words denoting kinship, natural phenomena, or desirable qualities. Names such as Kashtiliash and Burnaburiash demonstrate the complex morphological processes governing Kassite name formation. The phonological system of Kassite included sounds that posed challenges for Akkadian scribes attempting to render them in cuneiform. The frequent use of consonant clusters and the presence of sounds not found in Semitic languages led to considerable variation in the spelling of Kassite words across different archives. This linguistic evidence suggests the Kassites maintained their native tongue alongside Akkadian throughout their centuries of rule in Babylonia, creating a bilingual administrative culture. Comparative linguistic analysis has attempted to establish connections between Kassite and other ancient languages of the Iranian plateau, with mixed results. Some scholars have proposed distant relationships to Elamite or to hypothetical substrate languages of the Zagros region, but these connections remain speculative due to the limited corpus of available data. The isolation of Kassite within the linguistic landscape of the ancient Near East reinforces the distinct cultural identity of this mountain people. The social organization of early Kassite communities centered on kinship-based tribal structures that would persist throughout their historical trajectory. Archaeological evidence suggests these highland settlements were organized around extended family compounds, with multiple generations sharing residential complexes arranged around central courtyards. The distribution of prestige goods and burial practices indicates emerging social stratification, with certain individuals gaining access to imported materials and elaborate grave goods. Pastoral economy formed the backbone of Kassite subsistence in their mountain homeland, with extensive evidence for sheep and goat herding, supplemented by limited agriculture in suitable valleys. Faunal remains from excavated sites show high percentages of ovicaprid bones, indicating the central importance of these animals for meat, milk, wool, and hides. The seasonal movement of flocks between highland summer pastures and lowland winter grazing areas fostered familiarity with the geographical routes that would later facilitate Kassite expansion into Mesopotamia. The transition from purely nomadic pastoralism to semi-sedentary life appears to have occurred gradually during the early 2nd millennium BC, driven by population growth and increasing contact with settled agricultural communities. Permanent winter settlements in protected valleys allowed for the storage of surplus pastoral products and the development of craft specializations. These fixed bases also served as centers for trade networks that connected the Zagros highlands with the Mesopotamian plains. Archaeological evidence indicates the Kassites developed sophisticated techniques for managing their pastoral resources, including the construction of seasonal shelters, water management systems, and storage facilities for fodder. Stone-lined circular structures found at highland sites likely served as temporary shelters during seasonal migrations, while more substantial rectangular buildings in valley locations housed extended families during winter months. The earliest documented contacts between Kassites and Mesopotamian civilizations occurred during the latter part of the Old Babylonian period, as cuneiform sources begin mentioning Kassite individuals in various capacities. These initial references appear in administrative texts from sites like Sippar and Babylon, where Kassites are recorded as workers, soldiers, and occasionally as landowners. The gradual nature of this infiltration suggests a process of peaceful integration rather than sudden conquest. Kassite military service in Babylonian armies provided crucial opportunities for advancement and integration into Mesopotamian society. Their reputation as skilled warriors, honed through generations of tribal warfare in the mountains, made them valuable additions to royal forces. Babylonian kings increasingly relied on Kassite mercenaries and auxiliaries, particularly during conflicts with neighbouring powers like Elam and Assyria. The process of Kassite settlement in Babylonian territories unfolded over several generations, with individuals and small groups establishing themselves in rural areas before gradually moving into urban centres. Land grants and royal patronage facilitated this process, as Babylonian rulers sought to strengthen their military forces and administrative apparatus through the incorporation of capable foreign elements. Marriage alliances between Kassite families and established Babylonian lineages cemented these relationships and created networks of mutual obligation. Religious syncretism played a crucial role in Kassite integration, as they adopted Mesopotamian deities while maintaining their traditional pantheon. This flexible approach to religious practice allowed Kassites to participate fully in Babylonian society while preserving their cultural identity. Temples dedicated to both Kassite and Mesopotamian gods appeared in areas of a heavy Kassite settlement, reflecting the hybrid nature of their religious practices. The agricultural knowledge that Kassites brought from their mountain homeland proved valuable in Mesopotamian contexts, particularly in areas requiring irrigation management and livestock husbandry. Their expertise in horse breeding and training would later become legendary, contributing to military innovations that enhanced Babylonian power. The gradual accumulation of land holdings and economic resources positioned successful Kassite families for eventual political prominence. The death of Hammurabi in 1750 BC marked the beginning of a gradual but inexorable decline for the old Babylonian Empire that would ultimately create the conditions for Kassite ascendancy in Mesopotamia. His immediate successor, Samsu-iluna, inherited a vast territorial domain stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Euphrates Bend, but the administrative and military challenges of maintaining such an extensive realm quickly became apparent. Within the first decade of his 48-year reign, Samsu-iluna faced widespread rebellions across southern Babylonia, with cities like Ur, Uruk, and Larsa breaking away from central control and establishing independent dynasties. The Sealand dynasty emerged as the most formidable challenge to Babylonian authority during this period, establishing control over the marshy regions of southern Mesopotamia and effectively cutting Babylon off from maritime trade routes through the Persian Gulf. Led by Ilum Ma'ili and his successors, this breakaway state maintained independence for over a century, creating a persistent drain on Babylonian military resources and economic vitality. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ur and Eridu shows a marked decline in monumental construction and luxury goods during this period, reflecting the reduced prosperity of formerly prosperous southern cities. Samsu-iluna's military campaigns to restore central authority proved increasingly costly and ultimately unsuccessful. Cuneiform chronicles describe his forces burning rebellious cities and deporting populations, but these harsh measures only served to further destabilize the empire's economic foundations. The destruction of Ur around 1740 BC, documented in both archaeological layers and contemporary texts, eliminated one of Mesopotamia's most ancient commercial centers and disrupted trade networks that had functioned for millennia. The reign of Abi-Eshu witnessed continued territorial losses as Assyrian expansion under Shamshi-Adad II began encroaching on northern Babylonian territories. Administrative texts from this period reveal desperate attempts to maintain control through increased taxation and corvée labour obligations, policies that only accelerated the empire's internal decay. The once efficient bureaucratic system established by Hammurabi began breaking down as provincial governors gained de facto independence and local strongmen carved out autonomous territories. Amiditana's accession in 1683 BC brought temporary stabilization through diplomatic marriages and tributary arrangements with former rebellious cities, but these measures represented accommodation to weakness rather than restoration of strength. His building inscriptions, while maintaining traditional royal rhetoric, describe much more modest construction projects compared to earlier Babylonian monarchs. The famous Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, compiled during his successor's reign, reflects the continued importance of astronomical observation and divination, but also suggests a court increasingly concerned with predicting and averting disasters rather than confidently planning military campaigns. The final century of the Old Babylonian dynasty under Amisaduqa and Samsu-ditana saw the empire contract to a rump state centered on the city of Babylon itself and its immediate hinterland. Provincial archives from sites like Sippar showed declining administrative activity and increasing references to foreign mercenaries and auxiliaries in royal service. These texts mention Kassite individuals with increasing frequency, often in military contexts or as recipients of land grants in sparsely populated rural areas. The catastrophic Hittite raid on Babylon in 1595 BC under Mursili first delivered the final blow to the dynasty that had ruled Mesopotamia for 3 centuries. Hittite annals describe this campaign as a lightning strike designed to eliminate a potential rival and secure valuable plunder rather than establish permanent control over Babylonian territories. Mursili's forces advanced down the Euphrates Valley, bypassing heavily fortified positions and striking directly at the imperial capital before Babylonian forces could mount an effective defence. The sack of Babylon itself proved devastating both symbolically and practically, as Hittite forces carried away the cult statue of Marduk, along with enormous quantities of precious metals and luxury goods. Contemporary texts describe the removal of the god statue as a cosmic catastrophe that left the city spiritually defenceless and politically illegitimate. The Babylonian chronicles terse notation that Mursili marched against Babylon and captured Babylon understates the profound psychological impact of this humiliation on Mesopotamian consciousness. Archaeological evidence from Babylon's palace quarter reveals extensive destruction layers dating to this period, with burned administrative archives and collapsed mud brick walls testifying to the thoroughness of Hittite demolition. The loss of royal archives disrupted administrative continuity and eliminated institutional memory accumulated over generations of bureaucratic development. Craftsmen's quarters show similar destruction patterns, suggesting systematic looting of workshops and the deportation or flight of skilled artisans. The Hittite withdrawal from Babylon created an unprecedented power vacuum in central Mesopotamia that neither the Sealand dynasty nor Assyria possessed sufficient resources to fill immediately. This interregnum period, lasting approximately 3 decades, witnessed the emergence of multiple competing authorities and the breakdown of centralized administration across much of Babylonia. Local city governors, tribal chieftains, and military commanders established autonomous territories while nominally acknowledging distant overlords who lacked effective enforcement mechanisms. Kassite infiltration into this chaotic landscape began as a gradual process of individual and small group settlement rather than organized military conquest. Administrative texts from Nippur and other surviving archives record increasing numbers of Kassite personal names among property owners, craftsmen and agricultural workers during the late 17th and early 16th centuries BC. These individuals appear to have entered Babylonian society through various channels, including military service, intermarriage with local families, and direct land grants from struggling local authorities. The earliest identifiable Kassite leaders in Babylonia emerge from the documentary record during this transitional period, though their exact relationships to the later royal dynasty remain uncertain. Gandash, traditionally considered the founder of the Kassite dynasty, appears in later king lists but lacks contemporary documentation from his supposed reign period. This absence of contemporary sources suggests either that his authority remained localized and unofficial, or that later Kassite scribes retroactively elevated a tribal chieftain to royal status for dynastic legitimacy. More reliably documented is the figure of Agum I, whose inscriptions describe military campaigns against Elamite territories and the restoration of religious sites in northern Babylonia. His building activities at Dur-Kuragalzu and other locations indicate control over substantial resources and organized labor forces, suggesting successful consolidation of Kassite authority over significant territorial holdings. The archaeological record from this period shows renewed construction activity at several sites, with architectural styles displaying both traditional Babylonian features and distinctive Kassite innovations. The process of Kassite territorial expansion appears to have followed river valleys and major trade routes, with initial settlements concentrated along the Tigris and Euphrates systems where agricultural productivity remained high despite political instability. Cuneiform land sale documents from this period record Kassite individuals purchasing properties in established agricultural districts, often from Babylonian families facing economic hardship. These transactions suggest peaceful integration rather than violent dispossession, with Kassite newcomers adopting established land tenure systems and legal procedures. Kassite military organization during this infiltration period blended their traditional tribal structure with Mesopotamian administrative practices. Archaeological evidence from fortified sites like Tel Edda reveals defensive installations combining mountain warfare techniques with lowland architectural traditions. These hybrid fortifications featured thick mud brick walls reinforced with stone foundations, arrow slits positioned for mounted archery, and internal layouts accommodating both infantry and cavalry units. The integration of Kassite military units into existing Babylonian defensive systems proceeded gradually, with local commanders increasingly relying on Kassite expertise in horse breeding and cavalry tactics. Cuneiform texts describe Kassite contingents serving alongside traditional Babylonian infantry formations, often as specialized mounted units, providing reconnaissance and rapid response capabilities. Their superior horsemanship, developed through generations of mountain pastoralism, gave them significant advantages in the fluid military situation of post-conquest Babylonia. Religious syncretism facilitated Kassite acceptance within Babylonian communities, as their flexible approach to divine worship allowed participation in established cult practices while maintaining traditional beliefs. Temple archives from Nippur record Kassite individuals making offerings to Mesopotamian deities and participating in festival celebrations, while also documenting the construction of shrines dedicated to Kassite gods like Shukamuna and Shumalia. This religious accommodation created bridges between communities and reduced potential sources of cultural conflict. The agricultural knowledge that Kassites brought from their mountain homeland proved particularly valuable in areas requiring intensive irrigation management and livestock integration with crop production. Their experience with seasonal migration patterns and pasture rotation enhanced the productivity of mixed farming systems in marginal areas that had been abandoned during the political chaos following Babylon's fall. Land survey texts describe the restoration of abandoned fields and the construction of new irrigation channels under Kassite supervision. Kassite adoption of cuneiform literacy and Akkadian administrative practices accelerated their integration into Mesopotamian governmental structures. Schools established in areas of heavy Kassite settlement produced bilingual scribes capable of maintaining traditional bureaucratic functions while accommodating Kassite legal customs and social practices. These educational institutions became centers for cultural synthesis, producing a distinctive Kassite Babylonian administrative tradition that would characterize the later dynasty. The gradual nature of Kassite political consolidation allowed for the preservation of many existing institutional structures, while introducing innovations suited to changed circumstances. Local temple hierarchies continued functioning under Kassite patronage, maintaining traditional ritual cycles and festival calendars that provided continuity for urban populations. This conservative approach to religious administration earned Kassite leaders legitimacy among Babylonian priests and temple dependents who might otherwise have resisted foreign rule. The consolidation of Kassite authority in Babylonia reached its decisive phase during the reign of Agum II, known by his full royal name Agum-Kakrime, who transformed scattered tribal settlements into a unified kingdom capable of claiming legitimate succession to the ancient Mesopotamian imperial tradition. Archaeological evidence from Dur-Kurigalzu and contemporary administrative archives indicates that Agum II's reign, beginning around 1570 BC, marked the transition from opportunistic settlement to systematic state-building across the Babylonian heartland. Agum II inherited a patchwork of Kassite-controlled territories that extended from the middle Euphrates Valley to the Diyala River basin, but lacked the symbolic legitimacy and administrative cohesion necessary for effective governance over the diverse populations of central Mesopotamia. His predecessors had established military control through a combination of conquest and negotiated settlement, yet the absence of traditional Mesopotamian royal regalia and divine sanction left their authority vulnerable to challenge from both internal rivals and external enemies. The most pressing challenge facing the early Kassite state was the restoration of Marduk's cult statue to Babylon, which had remained in Hittite custody since Masilida's devastating raid nearly 3 decades earlier. Contemporary religious texts describe the spiritual crisis that gripped Babylonian society during this period, with traditional festivals suspended and temple revenues declining as worshippers questioned the god's abandonment of his ancient city. The Kassite rulers recognized that their political legitimacy depended fundamentally on demonstrating their capacity to restore cosmic order through the return of Babylon's patron deity. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Hattusa archives reveals the complex negotiations that Agum II conducted with the Hittite court to secure Marduk's release. These tablets, written in Akkadian diplomatic language, show the Kassite king offering substantial tribute payments, including precious metals, exotic woods from the Zagros Mountains, and high-quality horses bred in Kassite territories. The Hittite response demonstrates their recognition of Kassite legitimacy as Babylon's rightful rulers, addressing Agum II with the traditional royal epithets reserved for great kings of major powers. The physical recovery of Marduk's statue required extensive logistical preparation, as the sacred image needed to travel safely from Anatolia to Babylon, while maintaining ritual purity throughout the journey. Cuneiform records describe the construction of a specially designed wheeled shrine, covered with precious metals and protective amulets, drawn by white oxen selected according to ancient divination procedures. The procession route followed major trade highways through northern Syria and down the Euphrates Valley, with local rulers providing provisions and military escorts to ensure the god's safe passage. Agum II's inscription commemorating Marduk's return, carved on stone tablets discovered in Babylon's Esagila temple complex, provides detailed information about the elaborate ceremonies that marked this pivotal moment in Kassite dynastic history. The text describes how the king personally received the statue at Babylon's gates, performing traditional purification rituals before escorting Marduk to his restored sanctuary. The inscription emphasizes Agum II's role as the god's chosen representative, using formulaic language that directly echoes earlier Babylonian royal texts, while incorporating distinctively Kassite elements. The religious restoration ceremony extended over several weeks, with daily offerings and ritual performances designed to re-establish Marduk's presence in his earthly dwelling. Temple accounts from this period record massive expenditures on sacrificial animals, incense, precious textiles, and ceremonial vessels, indicating the enormous resources that Agum II devoted to legitimizing his rule through divine approval. The participation of priests from throughout Babylonia in these ceremonies created a network of religious officials with vested interests in supporting Kassite authority. Archaeological excavations in Babylon's temple quarter have revealed extensive reconstruction work dating to Agum II's reign, with new foundations laid for damaged shrines and expanded facilities for ritual activities. The architectural style of these renovations combines traditional Mesopotamian temple design with innovations reflecting Kassite building techniques learned in their mountain homeland. Thick walls constructed with alternating courses of mud brick and stone provide enhanced structural stability, while internal layouts accommodate both Babylonian and Kassite ritual requirements. The successful restoration of Marduk's cult transformed Agum II from a tribal chieftain into a legitimate Mesopotamian monarch, enabling him to implement comprehensive administrative reforms that would define Kassite governmental practice for the next 4 centuries. His reorganization of the provincial system maintained the basic territorial divisions established by earlier Babylonian rulers, while introducing new administrative positions specifically designed to accommodate Kassite nobles and military commanders within the existing bureaucratic hierarchy. The office of Saknu, or provincial governor, underwent significant modification under Agum II's reforms, with appointments increasingly going to Kassite aristocrats who possessed both military experience and familiarity with local conditions. These officials retained traditional responsibilities for tax collection, judicial administration, and military recruitment, but operated within a modified command structure that emphasized personal loyalty to the king rather than institutional continuity. Administrative texts from Nippur and Sippar show these Kassite governors maintaining detailed correspondence with the royal court, reporting on local conditions and requesting guidance on policy implementation. Land tenure arrangements established during Agum II's reign created a hybrid system that preserved existing property rights while accommodating Kassite settlement patterns and social organization. Royal land grants, documented in cuneiform legal archives, show systematic allocation of agricultural estates to Kassite military officers and tribal leaders, often in areas that had been abandoned during the political chaos following Babylon's fall. These grants typically included not only cultivated fields, but also pasture rights and water access privileges essential for maintaining the mixed agricultural pastoral economy that Kassites practiced. The integration of Kassite nobility with established Babylonian aristocratic families proceeded through carefully arranged marriage alliances that created kinship networks spanning both communities. Cuneiform marriage contracts from this period reveal sophisticated negotiations involving bride prices, dowry arrangements, and inheritance provisions designed to merge Kassite and Babylonian property holdings. These documents show Kassite families adopting Babylonian legal terminology and procedures, while maintaining their traditional emphasis on tribal affiliation and pastoral wealth. Judicial administration under Agum II combined Mesopotamian legal precedents with Kassite customary law, creating a flexible system capable of addressing disputes involving members of both communities. Court records from major cities show mixed tribunals including both Babylonian legal scholars and Kassite tribal elders, with decisions rendered according to the cultural background of the parties involved. This pluralistic approach to legal administration prevented the cultural conflicts that might otherwise have undermined Kassite authority among Babylonian populations. The military organization that emerged during Agum II's reign represented a fundamental innovation in Mesopotamian warfare, combining traditional infantry formations with Kassite cavalry units and mountain warfare techniques. Archaeological evidence from military installations along the kingdom's borders reveals fortifications designed to accommodate both foot soldiers and mounted troops, with specialized facilities for horse breeding and training. These defensive positions featured multiple defensive circuits, allowing defenders to conduct fighting withdrawals while maintaining communication with supporting units. Kassite military reforms introduced systematic cavalry training programs that transformed warfare throughout the region, with neighbouring powers eventually adopting similar mounted units to counter Babylonian advantages. Training manuals preserved in cuneiform archives describe elaborate procedures for breeding warhorses, selecting suitable mounts for different types of combat, and coordinating cavalry charges with infantry advances. The emphasis on individual horsemanship skills reflected traditional Kassite values while serving practical military requirements in the fluid tactical situations of ancient warfare. The development of a hybrid ruling class under Agum II's administration created lasting institutional structures that would characterize Kassite governance throughout their dynastic period. Royal inscriptions describe a court hierarchy that included both traditional Mesopotamian officials like the Sukalu and distinctively Kassite positions such as the Belpahete, who supervised pastoral territories and nomadic populations. This dual administrative structure allowed the kingdom to govern settled agricultural communities according to established precedents, while maintaining effective control over mobile populations that had previously operated outside centralized authority. Educational institutions established during this period produced a generation of bilingual administrators capable of maintaining governmental functions in both Akkadian and Kassite languages. Scribal schools in major cities developed curricula that included traditional Mesopotamian literature and legal texts alongside Kassite historical traditions and religious practices. These educational programs created a shared intellectual culture among the ruling elite, while preserving distinct cultural identities within the broader administrative system. The economic policies implemented by Agum II's government reflected the hybrid nature of Kassite society, with traditional Mesopotamian commercial practices adapted to accommodate pastoral production and mountain trade networks. Royal edicts preserved in temple archives describe standardized weights and measures for livestock products, regulated seasonal markets for pastoral goods, and established trade agreements with mountain communities that had previously operated outside Babylonian commercial systems. These innovations expanded the kingdom's economic base, while maintaining the agricultural productivity that supported urban populations. Temple administration under Kassite rule maintained traditional Mesopotamian religious practices, while incorporating Kassite deities into the official pantheon, creating a syncretic system that satisfied both communities' spiritual needs. Priestly appointment records show Babylonian religious officials continuing to serve in traditional positions, while Kassite cult specialists receive formal recognition for their expertise in mountain religious traditions. This inclusive approach to religious administration strengthened Kassite legitimacy among both urban and rural populations. The architectural projects undertaken during Agum II's reign demonstrate the synthesis of Mesopotamian and Kassite building traditions that would characterize the dynasty's monumental construction throughout their rule. Excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu reveal palace complexes featuring traditional Mesopotamian courtyard layouts enhanced with Kassite innovations, including elevated throne rooms, specialized horse facilities, and defensive features adapted from mountain fortress design. These structures served both practical administrative functions and symbolic purposes, displaying Kassite power while respecting established architectural conventions. The death of Agum II around 1545 BC marked the end of the foundational phase of Kassite rule and ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity that would establish Babylonia as one of the ancient world's great powers. His successor, Kashtiliash III, maintained the administrative and military structures established during the previous reign, while expanding diplomatic contacts with neighbouring kingdoms. However, it was during the reign of Kurigalzu I, beginning around 1400 BC, that the Kassite dynasty achieved its greatest territorial extent and cultural flowering. Kurigalzu I inherited a kingdom that had successfully integrated Kassite and Babylonian populations into a functioning administrative system, but his ambitions extended far beyond maintaining existing achievements. Contemporary royal inscriptions describe his vision of creating a new imperial capital that would rival the greatest cities of the ancient world, while serving as a symbol of Kassite power and cultural sophistication. The location he selected for this monumental project lay approximately 20 kilometers west of Baghdad, at a site the Kassites named Dur-Kurigalzu, meaning Fortress of Kurigalzu. The construction of Dur-Kurigalzu represented the most ambitious building project undertaken in Mesopotamia since the great ziggurat complexes of the Third Dynasty of Ur nearly 8 centuries earlier. Archaeological excavations conducted by Iraqi and international teams have revealed a planned city covering over 225 hectares, with massive mud brick walls rising to heights of 15 metres and defensive towers positioned at regular intervals along the perimeter. The city's layout followed a sophisticated urban planning scheme that combined traditional Mesopotamian architectural principles with innovations reflecting Kassite cultural preferences and military requirements. The royal palace complex at Dur-Kurigalzu occupied the city's highest elevation, with throne rooms, administrative offices, and residential quarters arranged around multiple courtyards, paved with fired bricks bearing Kurigalzu III's royal inscriptions. The throne room itself measured 45 metres in length and featured walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting Kassite royal symbols, mythological creatures, and tribute-bearing delegations from subject territories. Excavated fragments of these reliefs show sophisticated artistic techniques that combined Mesopotamian iconographic traditions with distinctive Kassite stylistic elements, particularly in the rendering of horses and mountain landscapes. The administrative quarter of Dur-Kurigalzu housed the kingdom's central bureaucracy, with archive rooms containing thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting every aspect of governmental activity. These tablets, written primarily in Akkadian but including numerous Kassite technical terms and personal names, provide unprecedented insight into the functioning of a major Bronze Age state. tax records show systematic collection of agricultural surplus from throughout Babylonia, while military documents detail the organisation of cavalry units and the procurement of horses from breeding centres in the Zagros foothills. The city's religious precinct centred on a massive ziggurat dedicated to Enlil, the ancient Mesopotamian god of air and authority, whose cult Kurigalzu I promoted as part of his efforts to legitimize Kassite rule through association with traditional religious practices. The ziggurat's base measured 90 metres on each side and rose in 7 stages to a height of approximately 60 metres, making it one of the tallest structures in ancient Mesopotamia. Bitumen waterproofing between the brick courses and internal drainage systems demonstrated advanced engineering techniques that ensured the structure's stability despite the region's challenging environmental conditions. Surrounding the main ziggurat, Kurigalzu then constructed temples dedicated to both Mesopotamian and Kassite deities, creating a religious complex that served the spiritual needs of the kingdom's diverse population. The Temple of Shukamuna, the principal Kassite god, featured architectural elements unknown in traditional Mesopotamian religious buildings, including elevated platforms for fire altars and specialized chambers for ritual activities involving horses and other animals sacred to mountain peoples. Excavated cult objects from these temples include bronze figurines of horses with elaborate decorative harnesses, stone reliefs depicting mountain hunting scenes, and ceramic vessels shaped like animals native to the Zagros highlands. The economic foundation of Kurigalzu-I's building projects rested on Babylonia's strategic position, controlling trade routes that connected the Iranian plateau with the Mediterranean coast. Kurigalzu's location provided direct access to both the Tigris and Euphrates river systems while commanding the overland routes that carried luxury goods between the major commercial centres of the ancient world. Customs records from the city's gates document the passage of caravans carrying lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, tin from Anatolia, cedar wood from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia, with royal officials collecting substantial revenues through taxation of this international commerce. The development of specialised craft quarters within Kurigalzu reflected the kingdom's growing prosperity and cultural sophistication. Archaeological evidence reveals workshops producing luxury goods that combine traditional Mesopotamian techniques with Kassite innovations, particularly in metalworking and textile production. Bronze foundries discovered in the city's industrial district used advanced smelting techniques to produce weapons and ornamental objects that were traded throughout the Near East. The quality of Kassite metalwork became legendary among contemporary civilizations, with Babylonian bronze items appearing in royal tombs from Egypt to Iran. Textile production at Kurigalzu incorporated wool from the kingdom's extensive pastoral territories, with imported materials like silk from Central Asia and cotton from India. Loom weights and dyeing vats found in residential areas indicate that cloth production occurred at both household and industrial scales, with royal workshops producing ceremonial garments for the court and diplomatic gifts for foreign rulers. Cuneiform texts describe Kassite textiles decorated with intricate patterns featuring horses, mountains, and celestial symbols that reflected the dynasty's cultural heritage while appealing to international markets. The reign of Burnaburiash II, beginning around 1359 BC, marked the apex of Kassite diplomatic influence and international prestige. His accession coincided with a period of intense diplomatic activity throughout the ancient Near East, as the major powers of the age, Egypt, Assyria, Mitanni, and Hatti, engaged in complex negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade rights, and dynastic marriages. The Amarna letters, discovered in the ruins of Akhenaten's capital in Egypt, preserve extensive correspondence between Burnaburiash II and the Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, providing remarkable insight into Bronze Age international relations. The diplomatic correspondence between Bernabriash II and Amenhotep III reveals a relationship between equals, with both rulers addressing each other as brother and exchanging lavish gifts that demonstrated their kingdom's wealth and cultural achievements. A letter from Bernabriash II to the Egyptian pharaoh describes the dispatch of a diplomatic mission carrying 20 talents of lapis lazuli, 15 high-quality horses with golden bridles, and ceremonial weapons decorated with precious stones. The Egyptian response mentions reciprocal gifts including gold jewellery, ivory objects and exotic animals from Africa, establishing a pattern of competitive generosity that characterised relations between Bronze Age superpowers. The correspondence also documents complex negotiations over the safety of merchants travelling between Babylonia and Egypt, with Bernabriash II complaining about attacks on Babylonian caravans in territories controlled by Egyptian vassals. His letter demands compensation for stolen goods and guarantees of safe passage for future commercial expeditions, demonstrating the importance of international trade to the Kassite kingdom's economic prosperity. The detailed inventories of stolen merchandise mentioned in these diplomatic protests provide valuable information about the types of goods that moved along ancient trade networks. Marriage diplomacy played a crucial role in Bernabriash II's foreign policy, with negotiations for dynastic unions serving both to cement political alliances and to enhance royal prestige through association with ancient and powerful ruling houses. The Amarna correspondence includes discussions about a proposed marriage between a Kassite princess and an Egyptian prince, with extensive negotiations over the bride's dowry, the status of her retinue, and the religious practices she would be permitted to maintain in her new homeland. These marriage negotiations reveal the complex cultural considerations that influenced international relations in the ancient world. The relationship between Bernabriash II and Akhenaten proved more challenging than the cordial exchanges with Amenhotep III, as the Egyptian pharaoh's religious reforms and political innovations disrupted established diplomatic protocols. Bernabriash II's letters to Akhenaten express frustration with reduced gift exchanges and delayed responses to Babylonian diplomatic initiatives, suggesting that Egypt's internal religious upheaval affected its international relationships. The Kassite king's complaints about the quality of gold received from Egypt, "The gold which my brother sends is not good. When placed in the fire it does not come out like real gold," demonstrate the detailed attention that ancient rulers paid to the symbolic value of diplomatic gifts. Bernabriash II's diplomatic activities extended beyond Egypt to include complex relationships with Assyria, whose expanding power posed increasing challenges to Babylonian territorial integrity. Cuneiform chronicles describe border conflicts in the region between the Tigris and the Zagros foothills, where Assyrian expansion threatened traditional Kassite grazing territories and trade routes. The Kassite response combined military action with diplomatic maneuvering, as Bernabriash II sought to build coalitions with other powers threatened by Assyrian ambitions, while strengthening his kingdom's defensive capabilities. The military innovations introduced during Bernabriash II's reign reflected both the changing nature of Bronze Age warfare and the specific advantages that Kassite culture provided in mounted combat. Archaeological evidence from border fortifications shows the development of specialised facilities for cavalry units, including covered stables, training grounds, and workshops for maintaining horse equipment. These installations featured sophisticated ventilation systems and drainage arrangements that maintained optimal conditions for the valuable war horses that form the backbone of Kassite military power. Kassite horse breeding programs during this period achieved remarkable success in developing animals suited for different military roles, from heavy cavalry mounts capable of carrying armoured warriors to light reconnaissance horses prized for speed and endurance. Cuneiform veterinary texts describe selective breeding techniques that produced horses with specific characteristics, while training manuals detail the procedures used to prepare mounts for combat conditions. The reputation of Kassite horses spread throughout the ancient world, with rulers from distant kingdoms requesting breeding stock and training expertise. The cultural achievements of Burnaburiash II's reign extended to literature and scholarship, as royal patronage supported the preservation and copying of ancient Mesopotamian texts, while encouraging the development of new literary works that incorporated Kassite themes and perspectives. The palace library at Kurigalzu contained one of the ancient world's largest collections of cuneiform tablets, including copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, and historical chronicles. Scribal schools attached to the library trained administrators in both Akkadian and Kassite languages, while maintaining the literary traditions that connected the dynasty to Mesopotamian cultural heritage. The preservation of Babylonian literary traditions under Kassite patronage proved crucial for the transmission of ancient Mesopotamian culture to later civilizations. Kassite scribes produced standardized versions of major literary works that became the basis for subsequent copies throughout the ancient Near East. Their editorial work included the addition of commentaries and glosses that explained archaic terms and cultural references, making these ancient texts accessible to contemporary readers while preserving their essential content for future generations. Religious scholarship flourished under royal patronage, with temple schools producing theological treatises that explored the relationships between Mesopotamian and Kassite deities, while developing sophisticated interpretive frameworks for understanding divine will through omens and divination. The synthesis of different religious traditions created new forms of ritual practice that satisfied both Babylonian urban populations and Kassite rural communities, contributing to the social cohesion that characterized the kingdom during its golden age. The economic prosperity that supported these cultural achievements rested on the kingdom's successful integration of agricultural production with pastoral activities and international commerce. Administrative records show systematic efforts to optimize land use through irrigation improvements, crop rotation schedules, and the coordination of farming with livestock grazing. The result was agricultural productivity that not only fed the kingdom's growing population, but also generated substantial surpluses for export and royal projects. The emergence of the Kassite kingdom as a recognized member of the exclusive club of late Bronze Age great powers represented one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of the ancient world. By the 14th century BC, Babylonia under Kassite rule had secured its position alongside Egypt, Hatti, Assyria, and Mitanni, as one of the 5 superpowers whose interactions shaped the political landscape from the Aegean Sea to the Iranian plateau. This transformation from mountain tribal confederation to major international player required sophisticated diplomatic machinery and a thorough understanding of the complex protocols that governed relations between ancient Near Eastern kingdoms. The Kassite diplomatic service that emerged during Burnaburiash II's reign operated according to well-established international conventions that had evolved over centuries of interstate contact. Royal correspondence preserved in archives from Egypt, Assyria, and Anatolia reveals a standardized diplomatic language that employed specific formulaic expressions to convey different levels of respect, friendship, and political alignment. Kassite scribes mastered these conventions while adapting them to express their kingdom's particular interests and cultural perspectives, creating diplomatic documents that were both internationally comprehensible and distinctively Babylonian. The physical apparatus of Kassite diplomacy included specialized courier services that maintained regular communication with foreign courts, despite the considerable distances and challenging terrain involved in ancient travel. Messenger stations established at strategic intervals along major routes provided fresh horses, provisions, and security for diplomatic missions travelling between Babylon and distant capitals. These installations, identified through archaeological survey work along ancient highways, featured fortified compounds with stables, storage facilities, and accommodation for travelling officials and their retinues. diplomatic missions themselves represented massive logistical undertakings that required months of preparation and enormous financial resources. A single embassy to Egypt might include dozens of officials, guards, and servants, along with hundreds of pack animals carrying gifts, supplies, and the elaborate ceremonial equipment necessary for proper presentation at foreign courts. Cuneiform administrative texts describe the procurement of luxury goods specifically for diplomatic purposes, including specially bred horses, precious textiles, exotic woods, and finely crafted weapons that would demonstrate Babylonian wealth and artistic sophistication to foreign audiences. The training of diplomatic personnel required extensive education in languages, customs, and political conditions throughout the known world. Kassite diplomatic schools, attached to the royal administration in Dur-Kurigalzu and Babylon, produced multilingual officials capable of conducting negotiations in Akkadian, Egyptian, Hittite, and other languages of international diplomacy. These institutions maintained detailed intelligence files on foreign rulers, court factions, economic conditions, and military capabilities that enabled Kassite negotiators to craft proposals suited to specific political situations. Marriage diplomacy constituted perhaps the most complex and sensitive aspect of international relations during this period, as dynastic unions carried profound implications for territorial claims, succession rights, and religious practices. The negotiations surrounding proposed marriages between Kassite princesses and foreign princes involved intricate discussions of dowry arrangements, the legal status of children from such unions, and the maintenance of appropriate religious observances in foreign environments. Surviving marriage contracts reveal the extraordinary attention to detail required to address all potential sources of future conflict, while preserving the dignity and interests of both royal houses. The correspondence between Bernabariash II and Amenhotep III regarding a proposed marriage alliance illustrates the delicate balance between political necessity and cultural sensitivity that characterized these negotiations. The Babylonian king's letters emphasize the exceptional beauty and accomplishments of his daughter, while carefully outlining the religious practices she would need to maintain in Egypt to preserve her spiritual connection to Kassite deities. The Egyptian response demonstrates similar concerns about integrating a foreign princess into pharaonic court life, while maintaining proper respect for her cultural background. Gift exchange protocols represented another crucial dimension of international diplomacy, with the value, appropriateness, and symbolic meaning of presents serving as indicators of political relationships and relative status between kingdoms. The Amarna correspondence contains detailed inventories of gifts exchanged between Kassite and Egyptian rulers, including precise descriptions of gold jewellery, precious stones, exotic animals, and manufactured goods that crossed international boundaries as tokens of friendship and alliance. The careful recording of these exchanges in royal archives demonstrates their importance as both economic transactions and political communications. Bernabariash II's complaints about the quality of gold received from Egypt reveal the sophisticated understanding of metallurgy and craftsmanship that informed diplomatic gift-giving. His assertion that Egyptian gold, when placed in the fire, does not come out like real gold, indicates not only technical expertise in metal testing, but also the symbolic importance of receiving gifts that met the highest standards of quality and purity. Such attention to detail reflected the belief that diplomatic gifts carried messages about the sender's respect for the recipient and the value placed on their relationship. The regulation of international commerce formed a major component of Kassite diplomatic activity, as the kingdom's prosperity depended heavily on maintaining secure trade routes and favourable commercial agreements with neighbouring powers. Diplomatic correspondence frequently addressed issues of merchant safety, customs duties, and the resolution of commercial disputes that arose from the complex web of trade relationships connecting ancient civilizations. Kassite negotiators developed standardized procedures for handling such issues, including arbitration mechanisms and compensation schedules for losses suffered by merchants operating in foreign territories. The territorial disputes that periodically erupted between Babylonia and Assyria required particularly delicate diplomatic handling, as both kingdoms claimed authority over strategically important regions that controlled access to mountain passes and river crossings. The contested areas around Arrapha and along the Diyala River Valley had changed hands multiple times during the preceding centuries, creating complex legal situations involving competing claims based on ancient treaties, military conquest, and administrative precedent. Kassite diplomats developed sophisticated arguments based on historical documentation, religious sanctions, and practical administrative considerations to support their territorial claims. Archaeological evidence from disputed border regions reveals the physical infrastructure that supported these competing claims, including fortified administrative centres, boundary markers, and irrigation systems that demonstrated effective governmental control. Excavations at sites like Nutsi have uncovered extensive archives documenting land tenure arrangements, tax collection procedures, and judicial activities that provided legal foundations for territorial claims. The meticulous record-keeping evident in these archives reflects the importance that ancient governments placed on maintaining documentary evidence to support their diplomatic positions. The negotiation of boundary agreements required detailed knowledge of local geography, historical precedents, and the practical requirements of administration and defence. Kassite negotiators employed teams of surveyors, legal scholars, and military advisors to develop comprehensive proposals that address not only the location of borders, but also the rights of populations living in disputed areas, the control of water resources, and the maintenance of trade routes that cross territorial boundaries. These complex negotiations often extended over years or even decades, with periodic conferences held at neutral locations where representatives could meet safely to discuss outstanding issues. Commercial treaties negotiated by Kassite diplomats established standardized procedures for regulating merchant activities across international boundaries, including customs duties, currency exchange rates, and legal procedures for resolving disputes. These agreements typically included provisions for the establishment of merchant colonies in foreign cities, where traders could maintain warehouses, conduct business according to their home kingdom's laws, and receive protection from local authorities. The reciprocal nature of these arrangements enabled Babylonian merchants to operate throughout the ancient Near East, while providing similar privileges to foreign traders in Kassite territories. The enforcement of commercial agreements required ongoing diplomatic attention, as changing political conditions and economic pressures regularly created new sources of conflict between trading partners. Kassite diplomatic correspondence includes numerous examples of protests against treaty violations, requests for compensation for damaged goods, and negotiations over modifications to existing agreements. The resolution of such disputes often involved high-level diplomatic intervention, with royal officials conducting investigations and mediating between competing claims to maintain the commercial relationships that supported international trade. The development of standardized weights and measures represented another important aspect of commercial diplomacy, as international trade required commonly accepted standards for evaluating the quantity and quality of goods exchanged across cultural boundaries. Kassite officials participated in international conferences that established uniform standards for precious metals, textiles, and other trade goods, while maintaining specialized facilities for testing and certifying products destined for export markets. Archaeological discoveries of standardized weights from Kassite sites show conformity with international standards, while bearing distinctive royal insignia that identify their authority and authenticity. The diplomatic archives maintained by Kassite administrators provide remarkable insight into the information-gathering activities that supported international negotiations. These collections include detailed reports on foreign military capabilities, economic conditions, court politics, and social developments that enabled Babylonian negotiators to craft proposals suited to specific circumstances. Intelligence networks that extended throughout the ancient world supplied regular updates on political developments, while specialized analysts interpreted this information to identify opportunities and threats that might affect Kassite interests. The coordination of diplomatic activities with military preparations represented a crucial aspect of Kassite foreign policy, as the credible threat of military action often provided essential leverage in international negotiations. Diplomatic correspondence frequently references troop movements, fortification projects, and alliance negotiations that supported Babylonian bargaining positions, while avoiding actual warfare whenever possible. The maintenance of powerful military forces, particularly the renowned Kassite cavalry units, served both defensive and diplomatic purposes by demonstrating the kingdom's capacity to enforce its international agreements. The religious dimensions of international diplomacy required careful attention to the diverse theological traditions that influenced political relationships throughout the ancient Near East. Kassite diplomats developed expertise in foreign religious practices, participating in appropriate ceremonies and making suitable offerings to foreign deities while maintaining their own spiritual obligations. The construction of temples dedicated to foreign gods in Babylonian cities served diplomatic purposes by demonstrating respect for allied kingdoms, while providing appropriate venues for visiting foreign dignitaries to conduct their religious observances. The legacy of Kassite diplomatic achievements extended far beyond their immediate political objectives, as the institutions and procedures they developed influenced international relations throughout the ancient world. Their contributions to diplomatic protocol, commercial regulation, and conflict resolution provided models that subsequent civilizations adapted to their own needs, creating lasting frameworks for peaceful interaction between different cultures and political systems. The sophisticated diplomatic machinery that enabled Kassite participation in Bronze Age international relations rested upon military foundations that combined traditional Mesopotamian warfare techniques with innovations derived from their mountain homeland. The transformation of scattered tribal warriors into a professional military force capable of projecting power across vast distances required fundamental changes in organization, equipment, and tactical doctrine that would influence warfare throughout the ancient Near East for centuries to come. The integration of horse-drawn chariots into Kassite military formations marked a revolutionary development in Bronze Age warfare, as these vehicles provided unprecedented tactical mobility while serving as platforms for elite warriors equipped with composite bows and bronze-tipped spears. Archaeological excavations at Durkara-Galzu have revealed specialized workshops where skilled craftsmen assembled chariots using techniques that combined Mesopotamian woodworking traditions with Kassite innovations in wheel construction and harness design. The discovery of bronze fittings decorated with horse motifs and mountain landscape scenes indicates the cultural significance that Kassites attached to these prestigious military vehicles. Chariot construction required access to diverse materials sourced from across the known world, including seasoned hardwoods for wheel rims and axles, bronze for reinforcing elements and decorative fittings, and leather from specific animal species for harnesses and protective equipment. Administrative tablets from royal workshops document the procurement of cedar wood from Lebanon, elm from Anatolia, and specialized bronze alloys that provided optimal combinations of strength and flexibility for military applications. The complexity of these supply chains demonstrates the sophisticated logistical capabilities that supported Kassite military operations. The training of chariot crews involved intensive programs that developed coordination between drivers and warriors, while teaching the specialized skills required for mounted archery and spear combat from moving platforms. Cuneiform training manuals describe exercises designed to improve accuracy while shooting from chariots, travelling at high speeds, with targets arranged at various distances and angles to simulate battlefield conditions. The emphasis on individual skill development reflected traditional Kassite values while serving the practical requirements of elite military units that operated as semi-independent tactical formations. Professional warrior classes emerged within Kassite society as military service became increasingly specialized and technically demanding. These elite soldiers, known by the Akkadian term kuradu, received extensive training in multiple weapon systems while maintaining the horses and equipment necessary for their military roles. Archaeological evidence from military installations shows residential quarters designed specifically for professional soldiers, with facilities for equipment maintenance, horse care, and weapons practice that supported year-round military readiness. The social status of professional warriors reflected their crucial importance to Kassite military effectiveness, with royal land grants and tax exemptions providing economic security for soldiers and their families. Legal documents from this period show warriors receiving hereditary estates that included not only agricultural land, but also pasture rights and water access privileges essential for maintaining their military mounts. These arrangements create a military aristocracy with vested interests in supporting royal authority, while maintaining the specialized skills necessary for effective military service. The integration of infantry formations with chariot units required tactical innovations that maximized the advantages of both weapon systems while minimizing their respective vulnerabilities. Kassite military doctrine emphasized coordination between mounted and foot soldiers, with infantry providing protective screens for chariot operations, while chariots delivered rapid strikes against enemy formations. Training exercises conducted at specialized military camps taught soldiers to operate effectively in combined arms formations that could adapt to different battlefield conditions and enemy tactics. The campaigns against the Sealand dynasty represented the first major test of Kassite military capabilities against organized opposition, as this breakaway state had maintained independence in southern Mesopotamia for over a century through a combination of natural defensive advantages and diplomatic maneuvering. The marshy terrain of the southern regions posed significant challenges for chariot operations, requiring Kassite commanders to develop new tactical approaches that emphasized infantry assaults supported by specialized watercraft, capable of navigating the complex network of channels and lagoons that protected Sealand cities. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ur and Eridu reveals extensive siege works dating to the Kassite conquest period, with earthwork fortifications, siege ramps, and artillery positions that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of siege warfare techniques. The construction of these installations required enormous labour forces and engineering expertise, indicating the resources that Kassite rulers were willing to commit to achieving complete control over Babylonian territories. Excavated siege equipment includes bronze-reinforced battering rams, scaling ladders, and siege towers that enabled attackers to overcome the substantial defensive walls that protected major Sealand cities. The naval operations that supported Kassite campaigns in southern Mesopotamia required the development of specialized watercraft and amphibious assault techniques adapted to the unique conditions of marsh warfare. Cuneiform texts describe the construction of shallow draft vessels capable of carrying cavalry units and their mounts through reed-choked waterways, while larger ships transported siege equipment and supplies from bases in central Babylonia. The coordination of land and water operations demonstrated the tactical flexibility that characterized Kassite military planning throughout their expansionist period. The final conquest of the Sealand dynasty around 1460 BC marked the completion of Babylonian territorial unification under Kassite control, eliminating the last independent authority that had challenged royal administration since the collapse of Hammurabi's empire. The integration of former Sealand territories into the Kassite administrative system required careful attention to local conditions and established political arrangements, with former Sealand officials receiving positions within the expanded royal bureaucracy. This inclusive approach to territorial integration prevented the rebellions that might otherwise have disrupted the newly unified kingdom. Border conflicts with Elam posed different challenges that required Kassite forces to operate in mountainous terrain similar to their ancestral homeland, but against enemies who possessed comparable knowledge of highland warfare techniques. The contested regions along the Diyala River Valley and the approaches to the Zagros passes had strategic importance far beyond their immediate economic value, as control of these areas determined access to trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau. Elamite raids against Babylonian territories threatened not only local populations, but also the commercial networks that supported Kassite prosperity. The defensive fortifications constructed along the eastern frontier demonstrate sophisticated understanding of mountain warfare requirements, with installations positioned to control key passes while maintaining communication with supporting bases in the lowlands. Archaeological surveys have identified fortified positions featuring multiple defensive circuits, underground water supplies, and specialized facilities for maintaining cavalry units in harsh mountain conditions. These installations incorporated architectural techniques derived from traditional Kassite mountain fortresses, while adapting to the specific requirements of defending lowland territories against highland raiders. Kassite military responses to Elamite incursions combined defensive measures with offensive operations designed to eliminate enemy bases and demonstrate Babylonian power in contested regions. Cuneiform chronicles describe campaigns that penetrated deep into Elamite territory, with Kassite forces conducting coordinated attacks against enemy settlements, while avoiding the pitched battles that might have favoured defenders familiar with local terrain. The emphasis on mobility and surprise reflected traditional Kassite military values, while serving the practical requirements of operations in hostile territory. The expansion into the Middle Euphrates region represented a different type of military challenge, as Kassite forces encountered established urban centres with their own military traditions and defensive capabilities. Cities like Mari and Turka had maintained semi-independent status for generations, developing sophisticated defensive systems and diplomatic relationships that complicated Kassite expansion efforts. The conquest of these territories required not only military success, but also political arrangements that preserved local autonomy while establishing effective royal control over strategic resources and trade routes. The control of overland trade routes became increasingly important as Kassite territorial expansion brought the kingdom into contact with commercial networks that connected distant regions of the ancient world. Military installations along major highways served dual purposes as defensive positions and customs stations, where royal officials could monitor commercial traffic while collecting revenues that supported military operations. The protection of merchant caravans became a major military responsibility, requiring regular patrols and the maintenance of secure staging areas where traders could rest and resupply during long journeys. The development of specialized cavalry units for patrol and reconnaissance duties reflected the particular advantages that Kassite military culture provided in controlling extensive territorial holdings. These mounted formations could cover vast distances quickly, while maintaining communication with fixed installations, enabling rapid response to threats or opportunities that arose along the kingdom's extended borders. Training programs for cavalry units emphasized endurance riding, navigation skills, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods while maintaining discipline and effectiveness. The logistics of supporting military operations across such extensive territories required sophisticated supply systems that could deliver equipment, provisions, and replacement personnel to forces operating hundreds of kilometers from their bases. Administrative tablets document the establishment of supply depots, the procurement of military equipment, and the coordination of transport services that maintained Kassite military effectiveness despite the enormous distances involved in frontier operations. These logistical capabilities represented one of the most impressive achievements of Kassite military organization. The integration of conquered territories into the Kassite military system proceeded gradually, with local populations providing auxiliary forces, while Kassite professionals maintained control of elite units and strategic positions. This approach maximized available manpower while preventing the concentration of military power in potentially unreliable hands. Training programs for auxiliary forces emphasized loyalty to the royal house, while teaching the tactical skills necessary for effective coordination with Kassite professional units. The technological innovations that emerged from Kassite military experience included improvements in weapons manufacturing, fortification design, and cavalry equipment that influenced warfare throughout the ancient Near East. Bronze weapons produced in Kassite workshops achieved legendary status for their quality and effectiveness, with distinctive decorative elements that identified their origin while serving practical functions in combat. The development of specialized horse equipment, including improved bridles, saddles, and protective armor, enhanced cavalry effectiveness while demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of equine biology that characterized Kassite military culture. The intelligence networks that supported Kassite military operations extended throughout the known world, providing commanders with detailed information about enemy capabilities, political conditions, and potential opportunities for expansion. These networks included merchants, diplomats, and specialized agents who gathered information while conducting legitimate business activities, creating comprehensive intelligence pictures that informed strategic planning and tactical decision-making. The coordination of intelligence gathering with military operations represented a significant advancement in ancient warfare techniques. The training facilities established for Kassite military forces became models that influenced military education throughout the ancient world, with foreign observers studying Kassite techniques and adapting them to their own military requirements. These institutions combined practical weapons training with theoretical instruction in tactics, logistics, and leadership, producing professional officers capable of commanding complex military operations. The emphasis on continuous learning and adaptation reflected the dynamic nature of ancient warfare while maintaining the cultural values that distinguished Kassite military traditions. The military conquests that established Kassite hegemony across Mesopotamia created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange and religious synthesis, as the dynasty's rulers recognized that lasting political control required more than military dominance. The integration of diverse populations under Kassite authority necessitated sophisticated approaches to religious administration that could accommodate the spiritual needs of both traditional Babylonian communities and the growing Kassite settler population, while maintaining the divine legitimacy essential for royal authority in ancient Mesopotamian society. The Kassite approach to religious integration demonstrated remarkable pragmatism, as rulers like Kurigalzudan and Burnaburiash II actively patronized traditional Babylonian deities, while simultaneously promoting their ancestral mountain gods within the official pantheon. This dual religious policy created a complex theological framework that satisfied different constituencies without compromising the essential spiritual foundations of either tradition. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes throughout the kingdom reveals architectural modifications designed to accommodate both Mesopotamian and Kassite ritual requirements, with traditional shrine layouts expanded to include specialized chambers for mountain religious practices. The restoration of Marduk's temple complex at Babylon represented the most visible symbol of Kassite commitment to Mesopotamian religious traditions, with successive rulers investing enormous resources in renovating and expanding the Asagila sanctuary that served as the god's primary earthly residence. Excavations in the temple quarter have revealed construction layers dating to multiple Kassite reigns, with each phase of building activity incorporating both traditional Mesopotamian architectural elements and distinctive Kassite innovations. The throne room where Marduk's statue received daily offerings featured walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs, depicting both Babylonian mythological scenes and Kassite royal symbols. creating visual narratives that connected divine authority with dynastic legitimacy. The daily ritual activities conducted at Esagila under Kassite patronage maintained traditional Mesopotamian ceremonial patterns while incorporating elements derived from mountain religious practices. Cuneiform ritual texts describe offering ceremonies that included traditional bread, beer, and animal sacrifices alongside distinctive Kassite contributions such as mare's milk, mountain honey, and specially prepared horse meat reserved for particular festivals. The integration of these diverse offerings required careful theological interpretation to ensure compatibility with established religious doctrine while respecting Kassite cultural sensibilities. The priesthood that administered Babylonian temples during the Kassite period reflected the dynasty's inclusive approach to religious authority, with traditional Mesopotamian clergy maintaining their established positions while Kassite religious specialists received formal recognition within temple hierarchies. Training programs for priests incorporated instruction in both Akkadian and Kassite religious texts, creating a bilingual clerical class capable of serving the spiritual needs of diverse congregations. Archaeological discoveries of priestly libraries reveal collections that included traditional Mesopotamian liturgical works alongside Kassite hymns and ritual instructions translated into cuneiform script. The renovation of Nippur's temple complex dedicated to Enlil, the ancient Mesopotamian god of air and divine authority, demonstrated Kassite understanding of the political implications of religious patronage. Enlil's cult had maintained paramount importance in Mesopotamian religion for over a millennium, with his temple serving as a crucial centre for royal legitimization ceremonies and divine consultation. Kassite rulers invested heavily in restoring and expanding Nippur's religious facilities, constructing new shrine buildings and residential quarters for priests, while maintaining the traditional ritual calendar that regulated agricultural and political activities throughout Babylonia. The architectural innovations introduced at Nippur combined traditional Mesopotamian temple design with Kassite building techniques developed in their mountain homeland. The main sanctuary featured reinforced foundations using alternating courses of mud, brick and stone that provided enhanced structural stability, while interior layouts incorporated elevated platforms and specialized ventilation systems that accommodated both traditional Mesopotamian rituals and Kassite fire ceremonies. The integration of these different architectural traditions created distinctive building styles that would influence religious construction throughout the region for centuries to come. The Temple of Shamash at Sippar underwent extensive renovation during the reign of Natsi Marutash, with construction projects that expanded the god's sanctuary while adding facilities dedicated to Kassite solar deities who shared attributes with the traditional Mesopotamian sun god. The theological synthesis that enabled this religious integration required sophisticated interpretive work by scribal scholars who identified correspondences between different divine personalities while maintaining the distinct characteristics that defined each tradition. Ritual texts from this period describe ceremonies that honoured both Shamash and Kassite solar deities through parallel offerings and prayers that emphasized their complementary rather than competing natures. The preservation of Sumerian religious texts represented one of the most significant cultural achievements of Kassite rule, as royal scribal schools undertook systematic copying projects that maintained ancient liturgical works for future generations. These preservation efforts extended beyond simple reproduction to include scholarly commentaries and linguistic analyses that made archaic texts accessible to contemporary readers. The Palace Library at Durkuragalzu contained one of the ancient world's most comprehensive collections of Sumerian religious literature, with standardized copies that became authoritative versions for temples throughout Mesopotamia. The development of Kassite artistic styles in religious contexts reflected the synthesis of mountain and lowland cultural traditions that characterized the dynasty's approach to cultural integration. Cylinder seals produced in royal workshops during this period featured iconographic programs that combined traditional Mesopotamian divine symbols with Kassite motifs derived from their ancestral homeland. These miniature artworks typically depicted scenes of divine investiture, where Mesopotamian gods granted authority to Kassite rulers, with mountain landscapes and horse imagery serving as visual references to the dynasty's cultural heritage. The technical execution of Kassite cylinder seals demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both Mesopotamian iconographic conventions and advanced stone-cutting techniques that produced exceptionally detailed and durable impressions. Archaeological analysis of seal impressions from administrative archives reveals the use of specialized tools and polishing compounds that achieved surface finishes superior to contemporary work from other regions. The artistic quality of these seals reflected the high status of their owners while serving practical functions in administrative and commercial contexts, where clear identification was essential for legal validity. Sculptural works commissioned for temple decoration during the Kassite period displayed similar synthesis of artistic traditions, with relief carvings that depicted traditional Mesopotamian religious scenes enhanced by distinctively Kassite stylistic elements. The treatment of human figures in these reliefs showed particular attention to costume details and physical characteristics that distinguished Kassite nobility from traditional Babylonian aristocrats, while maintaining the formal conventions that governed religious art throughout Mesopotamia. Animal representations, particularly horses and mountain wildlife, demonstrated exceptional naturalistic observation combined with symbolic meaning that connected earthly creatures with divine authority. The production of religious sculpture required access to high-quality stone materials that were often imported from distant quarries, creating supply networks that connected Kassite territories with specialized extraction sites throughout the ancient Near East. Administrative records document the procurement of black basalt from Syria, white limestone from the Zagros foothills, and coloured marbles from Anatolia that provided raw materials for temple decoration projects. The transportation of these heavy materials over vast distances required sophisticated logistical planning and substantial financial resources that demonstrated royal commitment to religious construction projects. The architectural decoration of Kassite religious buildings incorporated glazed brick techniques that achieved new levels of artistic sophistication and durability. The production of glazed bricks required specialized kilns and chemical knowledge that combined traditional Mesopotamian ceramic techniques with innovations developed in Kassite workshops. Archaeological analysis of surviving glazed brick fragments reveals complex firing procedures and glaze compositions that produced brilliant colors and weather-resistant surfaces suitable for exterior architectural applications. The decorative programs executed in glazed brick typically featured geometric patterns, animal motifs, and royal insignia that proclaimed dynastic authority while beautifying religious structures. The preservation and copying of Akkadian literary works under Kassite patronage contributed significantly to the transmission of Mesopotamian cultural heritage to later civilizations. Royal scribal schools established comprehensive copying programs that maintained not only religious texts, but also historical chronicles, legal collections, and literary works that form the foundation of Mesopotamian intellectual tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, and medical texts all received careful attention from Kassite scribes who produced standardized versions that became authoritative for subsequent generations. The scholarly apparatus that supported these literary preservation efforts included the development of lexical aids, grammatical analyses, and historical commentaries that made ancient texts comprehensible to contemporary readers. Kassite scholars produced bilingual dictionaries that explained archaic Sumerian and Akkadian terms, while providing Kassite equivalents for specialized vocabulary. These linguistic tools enabled the continued use of ancient texts in educational and administrative contexts, while facilitating the integration of Kassite cultural concepts into traditional Mesopotamian intellectual frameworks. The establishment of scribal schools throughout Kassite territories created educational institutions that trained administrators in both practical skills and cultural knowledge necessary for effective governance. These schools maintained curricula that included instruction in cuneiform writing, mathematical calculation, legal procedures, and literary appreciation, producing graduates capable of serving in various governmental and religious capacities. The bilingual nature of Kassite administration required educational programs that developed competency in both Akkadian and Kassite languages while maintaining familiarity with Sumerian religious and legal terminology. The musical traditions that developed in Kassite religious contexts combined Mesopotamian liturgical practices with mountain musical forms that reflected the dynasty's cultural heritage. Archaeological discoveries of musical instruments from temple contexts include lyres, drums, and wind instruments that show both traditional Mesopotamian construction techniques and Kassite decorative elements. Cuneiform musical texts describe ceremonial performances that incorporated both types of musical traditions, with Mesopotamian hymns accompanied by Kassite instrumental arrangements that enhance their emotional impact while maintaining religious propriety. The training of temple musicians required instruction in both musical traditions, creating professional performers capable of executing complex ceremonial programs that satisfied diverse congregations. Music schools attached to major temples developed specialized curricula that taught traditional Mesopotamian musical theory alongside Kassite performance practices, producing musicians who could adapt their performances to different ritual contexts. The integration of these musical traditions created distinctive ceremonial styles that influenced religious practices throughout the region, while preserving the essential characteristics of both cultural backgrounds. The development of religious festivals during the Kassite period reflected the synthesis of Mesopotamian and mountain cultural traditions in public ceremonial contexts that reinforce social cohesion while celebrating divine authority. The New Year festival at Babylon incorporated traditional Mesopotamian elements such as the ritual reading of creation myths and the ceremonial renewal of royal authority, while adding Kassite components including horse races, mountain-style wrestling competitions, and offerings of pastoral products. These expanded festival programs created opportunities for different social groups to participate in religious celebrations while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. The economic impact of religious construction and ceremonial activities represented a significant component of Kassite governmental expenditure, with temple projects providing employment for thousands of workers while stimulating demand for specialized materials and crafts. Administrative records show systematic allocation of royal resources to religious purposes, including not only construction costs, but also ongoing support for priestly personnel, ritual supplies, and festival expenses. The investment in religious infrastructure served both spiritual and political purposes, demonstrating royal piety while creating visible symbols of dynastic authority that reinforced governmental legitimacy throughout the kingdom. The religious and cultural synthesis that characterized Kassite rule created the foundation for sophisticated economic and social systems that transformed Mesopotamian society while preserving its essential agricultural base. The administration of vast territorial holdings required innovative approaches to land management, taxation, and social organization that could accommodate both traditional Babylonian practices and the pastoral traditions that Kassite settlers brought from their mountain homeland. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers throughout the kingdom reveals the emergence of hybrid systems that maximized agricultural productivity while maintaining the social cohesion necessary for effective governance across diverse populations. The introduction of Kuduru boundary stones represented one of the most significant innovations in Mesopotamian land tenure, as these carved monuments established permanent legal documentation for royal land grants while invoking divine protection for property rights. These stone markers, typically standing between 1 and 2 meters in height, featured elaborate relief carvings that depicted the symbols of major Mesopotamian and Kassite deities alongside detailed cuneiform inscriptions recording the specific terms of land grants. The iconographic programs on these monuments served both legal and religious functions, with divine symbols warning potential violators of supernatural punishment, while providing visual identification of the deities who sanctioned particular property arrangements. The production of Kuduru stones required specialized workshops that combined advanced stone-cutting techniques with sophisticated legal and theological knowledge. Archaeological excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu have revealed evidence of royal workshops where skilled craftsmen carved these monuments using bronze tools and abrasive compounds that achieved exceptional detail in both relief sculpture and cuneiform inscription. The selection of stone materials for Kuduru production typically involved black basalt or dark limestone that provided durable surfaces capable of withstanding centuries of weathering while maintaining legible inscriptions and recognizable divine symbols. The legal framework that governed Kuduru land grants established precedents that would influence Mesopotamian property law for centuries, with standardized formulaic language that defined the rights and obligations associated with different types of land tenure. These grants typically included not only cultivated fields, but also associated water rights, pasture privileges, and exemptions from various royal taxes and labour obligations. The comprehensive nature of these property arrangements reflected the complex economic relationships that characterised Kassite society, where successful integration of agricultural and pastoral activities required careful coordination of diverse resource uses. The divine protection clauses that appeared on Kuduru inscriptions invoked elaborate curse formulas designed to deter boundary violations and property disputes through supernatural sanctions. These curses typically called upon dozens of Mesopotamian and Kassite deities to afflict violators with diseases, military defeat and social disgrace, creating comprehensive spiritual deterrents that complemented legal enforcement mechanisms. The theological sophistication of these curse formulas required extensive consultation with priestly scholars who possessed detailed knowledge of divine attributes and preferred forms of supernatural punishment. Agricultural innovations introduced during the Kassite period transformed Mesopotamian farming practices through improved irrigation techniques, crop rotation systems, and the integration of livestock management with field cultivation. The administration of complex irrigation networks required sophisticated engineering knowledge and coordinated labour forces that could maintain canals, regulate water distribution, and prevent the salinisation that threatened agricultural productivity in the Babylonian alluvium. Cuneiform administrative texts describe systematic maintenance schedules for irrigation infrastructure, with specialised officials responsible for monitoring water levels, clearing block channels, and coordinating seasonal flooding patterns that renewed soil fertility. The development of new irrigation technologies included the construction of mechanical lifting devices that enabled cultivation of previously marginal lands while reducing the labour requirements for water management. Archaeological evidence from agricultural sites throughout Kassite territories reveals the remains of Shaduf-style water lifts, animal-powered irrigation wheels, and sophisticated canal systems that maximise the utilisation of available water resources. These technological innovations required substantial initial investments in construction materials and skilled labour, but provided long-term increases in agricultural productivity that supported population growth and urban development. The integration of pastoral activities with crop cultivation created mixed farming systems that optimised land use while providing diverse products for both local consumption and international trade. Kassite expertise in animal husbandry, developed through generations of mountain pastoralism, enabled the successful management of large livestock herds, within agricultural landscapes that had traditionally focused on crop production. Administrative records document the allocation of specific fields for fodder crops, the coordination of grazing schedules with planting cycles, and the development of specialized facilities for processing animal products. The breeding programs that Kassite administrators established for horses, cattle, and sheep achieved remarkable success in producing animals suited for different economic and military purposes. Veterinary texts preserved in temple libraries describe selective breeding techniques that improved the size, strength, and temperament of domestic animals while maintaining genetic diversity necessary for long-term herd health. The reputation of Kassite livestock, particularly horses bred for military service, created valuable export markets that contributed significantly to the kingdom's international trade revenues. Craft specialization reached unprecedented levels during the Kassite period, as urban workshops developed sophisticated production techniques that created luxury goods for both domestic consumption and international export. The concentration of skilled artisans in major cities like Babylon, Galzu, and Nippur fostered technological innovation and artistic development that enhanced the quality and variety of manufactured products. Archaeological excavations in craft quarters reveal evidence of specialized workshops producing textiles, metalwork, pottery, and jewelry, using techniques that combine traditional Mesopotamian methods with innovations derived from Kassite cultural traditions. Textile production represented one of the most economically significant craft industries, with royal workshops producing fine fabrics that incorporated wool from Kassite pastoral territories with imported materials like silk from Central Asia and cotton from India. The development of advanced dyeing techniques using both local plants and imported colorants created textiles with brilliant hues and complex patterns that commanded premium prices in international markets. Loom weights and spinning equipment discovered in residential areas indicate that textile production occurred at multiple scales, from household-level activities that supplied local needs to industrial workshops that produced goods for export trade. Metalworking industries during the Kassite period achieved exceptional technical sophistication through the development of new alloy compositions and casting techniques that produced superior weapons, tools, and decorative objects. Bronze foundries in major cities used advanced smelting methods that achieved precise temperature control and uniform metal composition, while specialized workshops produced iron objects using early smelting techniques that would later revolutionize ancient technology. The quality of Kassite metalwork became legendary throughout the ancient world, with Babylonian bronze weapons and ornamental objects appearing in royal tombs from Egypt to Iran. The organization of craft production required sophisticated supply networks that connected urban workshops with raw material sources throughout the known world. Administrative tablets document the procurement of copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, precious stones from Afghanistan, and exotic woods from distant forests, creating complex logistical systems that supported specialized manufacturing. The coordination of these supply chains required diplomatic relationships with foreign suppliers, secure transportation networks, and financial mechanisms that could handle long-distance commercial transactions. Urban development during the Kassite period reflected the growing prosperity and social complexity that characterized the kingdom's major cities. Archaeological evidence from Babylon, Galzu, and other urban centres reveals systematic city planning that provided infrastructure for diverse economic activities while accommodating the residential needs of expanding populations. Street layouts followed geometric patterns that facilitated commercial traffic, while residential quarters were organised according to social status and occupational specialisation. The growth of merchant classes represented one of the most significant social developments of the Kassite period, as successful traders accumulated wealth and social status that challenged traditional aristocratic hierarchies. These merchant families typically combined local commercial activities with long-distance trade operations, building networks that connected Babylonian cities with markets throughout the ancient world. Legal documents record merchant investments in real estate, agricultural land, and craft workshops that diversified their economic activities while providing security for their accumulated wealth. Commercial law developed during this period established standardized procedures for business transactions, credit arrangements, and dispute resolution that facilitated complex commercial relationships. Legal archives contain thousands of contracts documenting sales agreements, partnership arrangements, and loan transactions that reveal the sophisticated financial instruments available to Kassite merchants. Interest rates, collateral requirements, and repayment schedules were regulated according to established precedents that balanced the needs of borrowers and lenders while preventing exploitative practices. The banking institutions that emerged in major Kassite cities provided financial services that supported both local commerce and international trade operations. These early banks, typically operated by prominent merchant families, offered currency exchange, credit facilities, and secure storage for valuable goods and documents. Archaeological discoveries of bank archives reveal the complex record-keeping systems that tracked multiple currencies, monitored loan agreements, and maintained correspondence with business partners throughout the ancient world. Social hierarchy in Kassite society combined traditional Mesopotamian class distinctions with tribal structures that reflected the dynasty's mountain origins. The royal family and high nobility maintained their elevated status through control of land grants, military commands, and religious positions that provided both economic resources and political authority. Below this aristocratic elite, a growing middle class of merchants, skilled craftsmen, and administrative officials achieved prosperity through commercial success and professional competence rather than inherited status. The integration of Kassite tribal traditions with Babylonian urban society created unique social institutions that accommodated both pastoral and agricultural populations within unified administrative structures. Tribal councils continued to function in areas of heavy Kassite settlement, handling local disputes and maintaining traditional customs while acknowledging royal authority in matters of broader significance. These councils typically included both hereditary tribal leaders and appointed royal officials who ensured coordination between local and central governmental activities. Marriage patterns during the Kassite period reflected the complex social dynamics that characterized the kingdom's diverse population. Legal documents record numerous marriages between Kassite and Babylonian families that created kinship networks spanning both communities while preserving distinct cultural identities. These marriage alliances typically involved elaborate negotiations over dowry arrangements, property rights, and the cultural practices that children would follow, creating legal frameworks that accommodated different traditions within unified family structures. The legal status of women in Kassite society showed both continuities with traditional Mesopotamian practices and innovations that reflected mountain cultural influences. Women could own property, engage in commercial activities, and initiate legal proceedings, while maintaining traditional roles in household management and child-rearing. Archaeological evidence from residential areas reveals that wealthy women maintained separate quarters within family compounds, with facilities for textile production and other economic activities that contributed to household income. Educational institutions established during the Kassite period expanded access to literacy and professional training beyond traditional scribal families, creating opportunities for social advancement through educational achievement. Schools attached to temples and administrative centres offered instruction in cuneiform writing, mathematical calculation, and legal procedures that prepared students for careers in governmental service, commercial activities, and religious administration. The bilingual nature of Kassite society required educational programs that developed competency in multiple languages while maintaining familiarity with diverse cultural traditions. The development of professional associations among craftsmen and merchants created social organizations that regulated trade practices, maintained quality standards and provided mutual support for their members. These associations typically combined economic functions with religious activities, maintaining shrines dedicated to patron deities while organising festivals and ceremonial events that reinforced professional identity and social cohesion. Guild regulations established apprenticeship programs, pricing standards, and quality control measures that protected both producers and consumers while maintaining competitive markets. Labour organisation in Kassite territories included both free workers and various forms of dependent labour that provided workforce flexibility for different economic activities. Free labourers typically worked for wages in urban workshops or seasonal agricultural employment, while maintaining independent households and legal rights. Dependent workers included debt servants, prisoners of war, and individuals bound to specific estates through legal obligations, though their treatment was regulated by legal codes that prevented excessive exploitation. The taxation systems that supported Kassite governmental operations combined traditional Mesopotamian practices with innovations that accommodated the kingdom's diverse economic activities. Agricultural taxes were typically collected as percentages of crop yields, with rates varying according to land quality and irrigation requirements. Pastoral taxes were assessed on livestock herds, with different rates for various animal types and seasonal adjustments that reflected grazing patterns. Commercial taxes were levied on market transactions, with customs duties collected at border crossings and urban markets. The administration of tax collection required extensive bureaucratic machinery that could monitor economic activities throughout the kingdom while maintaining accurate records of governmental revenues. Tax collectors typically operated under the supervision of provincial governors who were responsible for meeting revenue quotas while preventing corruption and excessive burden on taxpayers. Appeal procedures allowed individuals to contest tax assessments through administrative and judicial channels that provided protection against arbitrary governmental actions. Economic planning during the Kassite period involved systematic efforts to coordinate agricultural production, craft manufacturing and commercial activities to maximize overall prosperity while maintaining social stability. Royal administrators maintained detailed records of resource availability, population distribution, and market conditions that informed policy decisions regarding land allocation, infrastructure investment, and trade regulation. These planning activities required sophisticated data collection and analysis capabilities that represented significant advances in ancient governmental administration. The sophisticated economic and administrative systems that had sustained Kassite prosperity for over 2 centuries began showing signs of strain during the latter half of the 13th century BC, as internal succession disputes weakened central authority while external pressures mounted from resurgent neighbouring powers. The kingdom that had once projected military force across vast distances and maintained diplomatic parity with the great powers of the Bronze Age world found itself increasingly unable to respond effectively to multiple simultaneous challenges that threatened its territorial integrity and economic foundations. The death of Natsi Maratush around 1274 BC precipitated a succession crisis that exposed fundamental weaknesses in Kassite governmental structures, as competing claimants to the throne mobilized different factions within the kingdom's complex tribal and administrative hierarchies. The traditional Kassite practice of selecting rulers through consultation between tribal elders and royal advisors had functioned effectively during periods of stability, but proved inadequate when faced with the rapid decision-making required to address immediate military threats. Archaeological evidence from Dur Kurigalzu reveals signs of hasty fortification work during this period, with defensive walls reinforced using salvaged materials and temporary structures erected within the royal compound, suggesting preparations for siege conditions that never materialized but reflected the atmosphere of uncertainty that gripped the capital. Kadashmanturgu's eventual accession to the throne around 1273 BC brought temporary stability to the succession question, but his reign coincided with the emergence of Assyria as an aggressive expansionist power under Shalmaneser I, whose military reforms had created professional forces capable of sustained campaigns far from their homeland bases. The Assyrian king's systematic conquest of Mitannian territories during the 1260s brought Assyrian forces to within striking distance of traditional Babylonian spheres of influence. While his diplomatic correspondence with Egyptian and Hittite courts demonstrated his kingdom's emergence as a major player in Bronze Age international politics, the growing Assyrian threat materialized dramatically during the reign of Tukulti-Ninurta I, who ascended the Assyrian throne around 1244 BC with ambitious plans for territorial expansion that directly challenged Kassite control over northern Mesopotamian trade routes and agricultural territories. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on consolidating Assyrian control over their immediate neighbours, Tukulti-Ninurta I possessed both the military resources and strategic vision necessary to mount sustained campaigns against major powers like Babylonia. His forces combined traditional Assyrian infantry formations with cavalry units and siege equipment that incorporated the latest military technologies, while his administrative apparatus could support extended military operations through sophisticated logistical systems. The initial confrontations between Assyrian and Babylonian forces occurred along the contested frontier regions, where both kingdoms claimed authority over strategically important cities and agricultural districts. Kashtiliash IV, who had succeeded his father Kadashmanturgu around 1232 BC, attempted to maintain Kassite territorial claims through a combination of diplomatic negotiation and limited military action, but found himself facing an opponent who viewed territorial expansion as essential for Assyrian security and prosperity. The Assyrian military machine that Tukulti-Ninurta first had inherited and improved represented a fundamental challenge to traditional Kassite military advantages, as Assyrian forces could match Babylonian cavalry capabilities while possessing superior siege equipment and more disciplined infantry formations. The decisive campaign that brought Assyrian forces to the gates of Babylon itself unfolded during the early years of Tukulti-Ninurta III's reign, as coordinated Assyrian attacks overwhelmed Babylonian defensive positions along the Tigris Valley, while secondary forces advanced down the Euphrates to threaten the capital from multiple directions. Contemporary Assyrian chronicles describe systematic siege operations that employed massive earthwork ramps, bronze-reinforced battering rams, and specialized assault towers that enabled attackers to overcome Babylon's ancient defensive walls. The archaeological record from this period shows extensive destruction layers in several Babylonian cities, with burned administrative buildings and collapsed defensive structures testifying to the effectiveness of Assyrian siege warfare. The capture of Babylon around 1225 BC represented one of the most shocking events in ancient Mesopotamian history, as the city that had served as a symbol of political and religious authority for over a millennium fell to foreign conquest for the second time since the Hittite raid 6 centuries earlier. Tukulti-Ninurta I's forces systematically looted the city's temples and palaces, carrying away enormous quantities of precious metals, luxury goods, and religious artifacts that had accumulated over generations of Kassite prosperity. Most significantly, the Assyrian king ordered the removal of Marduk's cult statue from the Esagila temple, repeating the symbolic humiliation that had accompanied the earlier Hittite conquest, and effectively proclaiming the end of Babylonian divine legitimacy. The deportation of Kashtiliash IV to Assyria eliminated the most visible symbol of Kassite resistance, while demonstrating Assyrian determination to establish permanent control over Babylonian territories. Assyrian administrative documents describe the captured Babylonian king's treatment as a royal prisoner, with provisions made for his maintenance in comfortable captivity, while his former kingdom underwent systematic reorganization under Assyrian supervision. The psychological impact of this royal captivity extended throughout Babylonian society, as traditional concepts of divine kingship struggled to accommodate the reality of their monarch's helplessness before foreign power. The Assyrian occupation of Babylon lasted approximately 7 years, during which Tukulti-Ninurta first attempted to establish direct administrative control over Babylonian territories through appointed governors and military garrisons stationed in major cities. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals modifications to existing governmental buildings that accommodated Assyrian administrative practices, while cuneiform archives show the introduction of Assyrian legal procedures and taxation systems that disrupted traditional economic relationships. The occupation forces faced persistent resistance from local populations who viewed Assyrian rule as illegitimate, leading to costly military operations that strained Assyrian resources while failing to establish lasting political stability. The eventual Assyrian withdrawal from Babylon around 1218 BC resulted from a combination of internal Assyrian political difficulties and the persistent costs of maintaining control over hostile territories hundreds of kilometers from their homeland bases. Rebellions in core Assyrian territories required Tukulti-Ninurta first to redeploy forces from Babylonian garrison duties, while the kingdom's extended military commitments had created financial strains that threatened domestic stability. The assassination of Tukulti-Ninurta I by his own son around 1208 BC eliminated the driving force behind Assyrian expansionism, while creating succession disputes that prevented effective response to Babylonian recovery efforts. The restoration of Kassite authority following the Assyrian withdrawal proved more complex than simple military reoccupation, as the 7-year period of foreign rule had disrupted traditional administrative structures while creating new power centres that challenged royal authority. Adad-Shuma-Usur, who emerged as the leading Kassite claimant during the Restoration period, faced the enormous task of rebuilding governmental institutions while addressing the economic damage caused by Assyrian looting and administrative disruption. Contemporary documents describe systematic efforts to restore temple functions, rebuild damaged infrastructure, and re-establish the complex network of land grants and administrative appointments that had characterized traditional Kassite governance. The return of Marduk's cult statue to Babylon represented a crucial symbolic victory for the restored Kassite regime, as this religious restoration demonstrated divine approval for the dynasty's continued rule while providing psychological reassurance to populations traumatized by foreign occupation. The elaborate ceremonies that accompanied Marduk's restoration followed traditional Mesopotamian protocols, while incorporating elements that emphasized Kassite resistance to foreign domination. Temple records from this period describe massive expenditures on restoration activities, with precious metals and luxury goods donated by wealthy individuals who sought to demonstrate their loyalty to the restored monarchy while contributing to the kingdom's spiritual recovery. The internal succession disputes that had facilitated Assyrian conquest continued to plague Kassite governance throughout the 12th century BC, as competing branches of the royal family mobilized different tribal and regional constituencies in struggles for political control. The traditional Kassite emphasis on consultation and consensus building, which had provided stability during earlier periods, proved inadequate for addressing the rapid decision-making required to respond to external threats and internal challenges. Archaeological evidence from royal residences shows signs of fortification and defensive preparation that suggest ongoing concerns about internal security, while administrative archives reveal declining central authority over provincial governors who increasingly operated as autonomous rulers. The fragmentation of central authority created opportunities for local strongmen and tribal leaders to establish independent power bases that challenged royal control over taxation, military recruitment, and judicial administration. Cuneiform legal documents from this period show increasing numbers of disputes between different authorities, with competing claims over land rights, water access, and commercial privileges creating legal chaos that undermined economic stability. The breakdown of unified legal administration particularly affected commercial activities, as merchants faced uncertain legal environments that increased transaction costs while reducing the predictability essential for long-distance trade operations. The weakening of Kassite military capabilities during this period reflected both the direct losses suffered during the Assyrian conquest and the ongoing internal disputes that prevented effective coordination of defensive preparations. The kingdom's traditional military advantages in cavalry warfare became less significant as neighbouring powers developed comparable mounted forces while improving their siege capabilities and infantry tactics. Archaeological evidence from border fortifications shows declining maintenance standards and reduced garrison sizes, suggesting systematic deterioration of defensive capabilities that left Babylonian territories vulnerable to external attack. The Elamite kingdom, which had maintained generally peaceful relations with Kassite Babylonia during the height of the dynasty's power, began launching increasingly aggressive raids into eastern Babylonian territories as Kassite military weakness became apparent. These incursions initially focused on border regions where Elamite forces could strike quickly and withdraw before Babylonian reinforcements arrived, but gradually expanded to include attacks on major cities and agricultural centres that had previously been secure from external threat. The Elamite military organisation, which combined mountain warfare techniques with innovations borrowed from Mesopotamian military traditions, proved particularly effective against weakened Kassite defensive forces. Elamite raids during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC targeted the agricultural infrastructure that supported Babylonian urban centres, with systematic destruction of irrigation systems, granaries and livestock herds that created lasting economic damage extending far beyond immediate military losses. Contemporary chronicles describe Elamite forces driving away thousands of cattle and sheep while destroying crops and agricultural equipment that represented years of accumulated investment. The psychological impact of these raids extended throughout Babylonian society, as populations that had enjoyed security for generations found themselves vulnerable to sudden attack and economic devastation. The disruption of eastern trade routes by Elamite military activities eliminated one of the traditional sources of Kassite prosperity, as merchant caravans could no longer safely traverse the territories that connected Mesopotamian markets with Iranian plateau trading centres. The loss of access to luxury goods from Central Asia, precious stones from Afghanistan, and metals from Iranian mining districts forced Babylonian craftsmen to seek alternative supply sources that were often more expensive and less reliable. Archaeological evidence from craft workshops during this period shows declining production levels and reduced quality standards that reflected both material shortages and the economic uncertainty that discouraged investment in specialised manufacturing. The collapse of late Bronze Age international trading systems during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC created additional pressures on Kassite economic foundations, as the complex network of commercial relationships that had supported the kingdom's prosperity disintegrated under the impact of widespread political instability and military conflict. The destruction of major trading centres like Ugarit, the decline of Hittite power in Anatolia, and the internal difficulties that affected Egyptian commercial activities eliminated many of the markets that had absorbed Babylonian exports, while providing essential imports. The Sea People's migrations and attacks, which disrupted Mediterranean trading networks and contributed to the collapse of several Bronze Age civilizations, had indirect but significant impacts on Babylonian economic conditions through the disruption of long-distance commercial relationships. Although the Sea Peoples themselves never directly threatened Mesopotamian territories, their destruction of coastal trading centres and their impact on Egyptian and Hittite commercial capabilities reduced demand for Babylonian luxury goods while eliminating sources of imported materials that Kassite craftsmen had incorporated into their products. The economic difficulties that resulted from disrupted trade networks created domestic pressures that further weakened Kassite governmental authority, as declining royal revenues reduced the resources available for military defence, administrative operations, and the public works projects that had traditionally demonstrated royal power and legitimacy. Tax collection became increasingly difficult as agricultural productivity declined and commercial activities contracted, while the costs of maintaining defensive forces and governmental apparatus continued to consume substantial resources. The resulting fiscal crisis forced Kassite rulers to make difficult choices between competing priorities, often leading to decisions that satisfied immediate needs while creating longer-term problems. The social consequences of economic decline included increased migration from rural areas to urban centres, as agricultural populations sought security and economic opportunities in cities that were themselves struggling with reduced commercial activity and declining governmental services. This internal migration created overcrowding in urban areas, while reducing agricultural productivity in abandoned rural districts, contributing to food shortages and social unrest that further undermined political stability. Archaeological evidence from major cities during this period shows expansion of residential areas beyond traditional city walls, suggesting rapid population growth that strained existing infrastructure and services. The breakdown of traditional social hierarchies accelerated during this period of crisis, as economic disruption and political uncertainty created opportunities for social mobility while undermining the established relationships that had maintained stability during the kingdom's prosperous period. Merchant families that had accumulated wealth during earlier periods found their commercial networks disrupted, while military officers and administrative officials faced uncertain career prospects in a contracting governmental system. The result was increased social competition and conflict that diverted energy from collective responses to external threats while creating additional sources of internal instability. The religious implications of Kassite decline included challenges to traditional concepts of divine kingship and royal legitimacy that had provided ideological foundations for the dynasty's authority. The temporary loss of Marduk's statue during the Assyrian occupation had demonstrated the vulnerability of traditional religious symbols, while ongoing military defeats and economic difficulties raised questions about divine favour that traditional theological explanations struggled to address. Temple revenues declined as economic conditions deteriorated, reducing the resources available for religious ceremonies and building maintenance that had traditionally reinforced royal authority through visible demonstrations of divine approval. The cultural consequences of this period of decline included the gradual erosion of the distinctive Kassite Babylonian synthesis that had characterized the kingdom's golden age, as external pressures and internal difficulties reduced the resources available for cultural patronage and artistic production. The palace workshops that had produced luxury goods, combining Mesopotamian and Kassite artistic traditions, reduced their output, while the scribal schools that had maintained bilingual educational programs struggled with declining enrollment and reduced royal support. The result was a gradual simplification of cultural expression that eliminated many of the distinctive features that had distinguished Kassite civilization during its period of greatest achievement. The cultural and administrative deterioration that characterized the late Kassite period accelerated dramatically during the final decades of the 12th century BC, as successive rulers proved unable to address the mounting challenges that threatened the kingdom's survival. Meli-Shipak's reign, beginning around 1186 BC, coincided with renewed Elamite aggression under Shutruk-Nahunta, whose military campaigns represented a fundamental shift from opportunistic raiding to systematic conquest aimed at establishing permanent Elamite control over Babylonian territories. Unlike earlier Elamite incursions that had focused on capturing livestock and portable wealth, Shutruk-Nahunta's forces targeted the symbolic and administrative centres of Kassite power with methodical precision that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Mesopotamian political structures. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout eastern Babylonia reveals the systematic nature of Elamite military operations during this period, with destruction layers showing coordinated attacks on administrative buildings, temple complexes, and defensive installations that eliminated the infrastructure necessary for organised resistance. The Elamite forces employed siege techniques that combined traditional mountain warfare methods with innovations borrowed from Mesopotamian military traditions, using specialised equipment to breach defensive walls while maintaining the mobility advantages that had characterised their earlier raiding activities. Excavations at sites like Sippar and Nippur show evidence of intensive siege operations, with earthwork ramps, siege tunnels, and artillery positions that enabled systematic reduction of fortified positions. The capture of Babylon itself around 1158 BC marked the culmination of Shutruk-Nahunta's conquest campaign and effectively ended 4 centuries of Kassite rule over Mesopotamia. Contemporary Elamite chronicles describe the systematic looting of the city's temples and palaces, with particular attention to removing religious artifacts and royal monuments that symbolized Babylonian political and spiritual authority. The Elamite forces carried away thousands of cuneiform tablets from royal and temple archives, eliminating crucial administrative records while disrupting the institutional memory that had sustained governmental operations for generations. Most significantly, they removed the cult statues of major Mesopotamian deities, including Marduk himself, in a deliberate attempt to sever the spiritual connections that legitimized Babylonian royal authority. The deportation of royal statues and monuments to Susa represented more than simple military plunder, as these objects served as tangible symbols of political legitimacy that Elamite rulers could display as evidence of their victory over ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The famous Code of Hammurabi, which had stood in Babylon for over 6 centuries as a symbol of legal authority and royal justice, was among the monuments transported to the Elamite capital, where it remained until its rediscovery by French archaeologists in the early 20th century. Victory steles commemorating Kassite military achievements, boundary stones marking royal land grants, and cult objects from major temples all disappeared into Elamite collections that proclaimed the complete subjugation of their traditional enemies. The systematic removal of these cultural artifacts created a spiritual and administrative crisis that extended far beyond immediate military defeat, as Babylonian society struggled to maintain traditional religious and governmental practices without the physical objects that had anchored these activities for centuries. Temple priests found themselves unable to conduct daily rituals that required specific cult statues, while legal proceedings became complicated by the absence of authoritative legal monuments and administrative records. The psychological impact of this cultural devastation proved as damaging as the immediate military losses, as populations that had maintained their identity through connection to ancient traditions found themselves severed from the material foundations of their civilization. Enlil-nadin Ahi's brief reign following the Elamite conquest represented a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of Kassite authority in the face of overwhelming foreign domination. Archaeological evidence suggests that his administration operated from temporary centres outside the traditional capitals, using salvaged administrative records and improvised governmental procedures to maintain basic functions. However, the loss of the kingdom's economic base, combined with the absence of the religious legitimacy that had traditionally supported royal authority, made effective governance nearly impossible. Administrative tablets from this period show declining tax revenues, reduced military capabilities, and the gradual breakdown of the complex bureaucratic systems that had characterized Kassite administration during its golden age. The final elimination of Kassite royal authority came with Shutruk-Nahunta's capture and deportation of the last Kassite king around 1155 BC, ending a dynasty that had ruled Babylonia longer than any other foreign power in Mesopotamian history. Unlike earlier conquests that had resulted in the replacement of one ruling dynasty with another, the Elamite victory created a prolonged period of political fragmentation, during which no single authority could establish effective control over the former Kassite territories. Local governors, tribal chieftains, and military commanders carved out autonomous regions, while acknowledging nominal Elamite overlordship that lacked the administrative apparatus necessary for direct governance. The restoration of Babylonian independence under Nebuchadnezzar of the Second Dynasty of Isin around 1125 BC marked a crucial turning point in Mesopotamian political history, as this energetic ruler successfully mobilized the resources necessary to challenge Elamite domination while establishing new foundations for Babylonian royal authority. His military campaigns against Elam employed innovative tactics that combined traditional Mesopotamian siege warfare with guerrilla techniques adapted to mountain terrain, enabling Babylonian forces to operate effectively in the challenging geographical conditions that had previously favoured Elamite defenders. The successful siege of Susa and the recovery of Marduk's cult statue represented both practical military achievements and powerful symbolic victories that demonstrated the restoration of divine favour for Babylonian rule. Nebuchadnezzar's recovery of stolen cultural artefacts from Elamite collections provided tangible evidence of Babylonian resurgence while addressing the spiritual crisis that had accompanied the loss of traditional religious objects. The elaborate ceremonies that marked Marduk's return to Babylon followed ancient protocols while incorporating new elements that celebrated the kingdom's liberation from foreign domination. Temple records describe massive popular celebrations that continued for weeks, with processions, sacrificial offerings, and ritual performances that reinforced social cohesion, while proclaiming the restoration of traditional Mesopotamian civilization under native rule. The administrative reforms implemented by Nebuchadnezzar I and his successors drew heavily upon Kassite governmental innovations, while adapting these systems to changed political and economic conditions. The Kuduru boundary stone system, which had provided legal frameworks for land tenure during the Kassite period, continued under the Second Dynasty of Isin with modifications that addressed the territorial disruptions caused by foreign conquest and population displacement. Royal land grants to military officers and administrative officials followed Kassite precedents while incorporating new provisions that reflected lessons learned from the dynasty's collapse. The long-term impact of Kassite rule on Babylonian culture proved remarkably durable, as many innovations introduced during their 4-century dominion became permanent features of Mesopotamian civilization. The integration of cavalry warfare techniques into Babylonian military doctrine continued throughout subsequent periods, with horse breeding and training programs maintaining the standards established during the Kassite Golden Age. Archaeological evidence from later periods shows continued use of architectural techniques developed in Kassite royal workshops, particularly the construction methods that combine traditional Mesopotamian building practices with structural innovations derived from mountain fortress design. Legal traditions established during the Kassite period influenced Mesopotamian jurisprudence for centuries after the dynasty's fall, with precedents set in Kassite courts providing foundations for subsequent legal developments. The emphasis on written documentation that characterized Kassite administrative practice contributed to the preservation of legal records that enabled later scholars to maintain continuity in judicial procedures despite political disruptions. Property law concepts developed for managing the complex relationships between agricultural and pastoral activities continue to influence land tenure arrangements throughout the first millennium BC. Religious syncretism achieved during the Kassite period created lasting theological frameworks that influenced Mesopotamian religious practice long after the dynasty's disappearance. The integration of mountain deities into the Mesopotamian pantheon provided models for subsequent religious adaptations, while the architectural innovations developed for temples serving both Babylonian and Kassite communities influenced religious construction throughout the region. Ritual practices that combined different cultural traditions continued in modified forms, contributing to the religious diversity that characterized later Mesopotamian civilization. The preservation of Sumerian and Akkadian literary works under Kassite patronage proved crucial for the transmission of ancient Mesopotamian culture to subsequent civilizations. The standardized texts produced in Kassite scribal schools became authoritative versions that influenced all later copies, while the scholarly apparatus developed to make ancient works accessible to contemporary readers provided models for subsequent literary preservation efforts. The Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, and historical chronicles all survived in forms established during the Kassite period, enabling their eventual transmission to Greek, Islamic, and modern scholars. Archaeological rediscovery of Kassite sites began during the 19th century as European excavations at Babylon and other Mesopotamian cities uncovered evidence of their 4th century rule. The identification of Dur-Kuragaldzu as a major Kassite capital provided crucial insights into their urban planning, architectural innovations, and administrative systems that had been largely unknown from textual sources alone. Systematic excavations conducted throughout the 20th century revealed the extent of Kassite territorial control and the sophistication of their governmental apparatus, fundamentally revising scholarly understanding of late Bronze Age Mesopotamian history. The decipherment of Kassite personal names and administrative terminology in cuneiform archives provided linguistic evidence that confirmed their non-Semitic origins while revealing the extent of their cultural adaptation to Mesopotamian civilization. Comparative studies of Kassite language elements with other ancient languages of the Iranian plateau suggested possible connections to broader Indo-European or pre-Indo-European linguistic families, though the limited corpus of available data prevents definitive classification. The bilingual nature of Kassite administration, documented through thousands of cuneiform tablets, demonstrates their successful integration of different cultural traditions within unified governmental systems. Modern understanding of Kassite civilization has been enhanced by interdisciplinary research that combines archaeological excavation with textual analysis, environmental studies, and comparative historical investigation. Climate data derived from ice cores and sediment analysis has provided insights into the environmental conditions that influenced Kassite agricultural practices and territorial expansion, while metallurgical studies of surviving artifacts have revealed the technical innovations that contributed to their military and economic success. Demographic studies based on settlement patterns and cemetery excavations have illuminated population movements and social structures that shaped Kassite society throughout their historical trajectory. The recognition of Kassite achievements in international diplomacy has grown as scholars have gained access to archives from Egypt, Assyria, and Anatolia that document their participation in Bronze Age great power politics. The Amarna letters and other diplomatic correspondence reveal the sophistication of Kassite foreign policy and their success in maintaining political independence while participating in complex international relationships. Their contributions to the development of diplomatic protocol, commercial regulation, and conflict resolution provided foundations for international relations that influenced subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. The Kassite legacy in Mesopotamian history represents one of the most successful examples of cultural synthesis in the ancient world, as foreign rulers managed to maintain political control while preserving and enhancing the civilizational achievements of their predecessors. Their 4th century dominion over Babylonia created institutional frameworks that survived their political collapse, contributing to the continuity of Mesopotamian civilization despite repeated foreign conquests and internal disruptions. The administrative innovations, cultural achievements, and diplomatic precedents established during Kassite rule provided foundations that supported Mesopotamian civilization throughout its subsequent history, ensuring that their influence extended far beyond their immediate chronological boundaries. The final assessment of Kassite rule must acknowledge both their remarkable achievements and the factors that ultimately led to their downfall. Their success in creating a stable, prosperous kingdom that lasted longer than most ancient dynasties demonstrates exceptional political and administrative capabilities, while their cultural contributions enriched Mesopotamian civilization in ways that proved permanent. However, their inability to adapt effectively to the changing international conditions of the Late Bronze Age, combined with internal succession disputes that weakened central authority, created vulnerabilities that more aggressive neighbours could exploit. The Kassite experience thus provides valuable insights into both the possibilities and limitations of foreign rule in ancient civilizations, illustrating how successful cultural adaptation could create lasting achievements, while political inflexibility could lead to catastrophic collapse.